1973 marks 50 years of many great things this year. Starring in England by the Pound by Genesis, A Passion Play by Jethro Tull, Styx 2 by Styx, Tubular Bells, the debut album by Mike Oldfield, In a Glass House by Gentle Giant, Houses of the Holy by Led Zeppelin, and the iconic Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd. But one thing comes to my mind when I think of 1973. The start of the career of the legendary prog rock, hard rock band Kansas. Welcome to the Vinyl Hub, and I'm your host Liam, and welcome back to episode 6 of The Share. Today we dive into the extraordinary 50 years of this act from Kansas, and we talk about my favourite moments from the band's long-spanning career. But first, we talk about their beginnings in music before their debut album in 1974. So starting in 1969, two guys named Don Montree and Kerry Livgreen would perform in a band called The Reasons Why in their hometown of Topeka in Kansas. After leaving to form the band Saratoga with Lynn Meredith and Dan Wright, they would start playing Livgreen's original material with Scott Kelzer playing bass and Zeki Lower coming in on drums. In 1970, they would change the name to Kansas and merge with members of rival Topeka progressive rock band White Clover. Clover members Dave Hope and Phil Earnhardt would join with Livgreen, with vocalist Meredith and Greg Allen, keyboardists Montree Wright, and saxophonist Larry Baker. This early iteration of Kansas is sometimes referred to as Kansas 1, until 1971 when Earnhardt, Hope, and some of the other members left to reform White Clover. Earnhardt was replaced by Zeke, and then later Brad Schultz. Hope would be replaced by Rod Milinski, and on bass and Barker was replaced by John Bolton on saxophone and flute. This lineup is referred to as Kansas Number 2, and would reform under Protocol. They would reform 30 years later under Protocol, and of course release those early tapes of the band. In 1972, after Phil returned from England, when he had gone to look for other musicians, he and Hope once reformed again the White Clover Band with Robbie Steinhardt, which you guys would know would join up with Kansas. And in 1973, with Steve Walsh and Rich Williams at the hand, they re-recruited Livgreen from the second Kansas group, which then folded. Eventually, they were given a recording contract from Don Kirshner's Eponymous label, which would be iconic to Kansas' early career. After their assistant, Wally Gold, heard one of their demo tapes and came out to check out the band at one of their local gigs in March of 1973 in Ealerwood in Kansas. After signing with Kirshner, the group decided to return to use the name that we know now, Kansas. So early on, there was promise for this young band from their early roots in suburban Kansas. Well, what does it look like in their first group of albums from 1974 to 1970? Probably would say 1979. So in 1974, they would release their self-titled debut album, produced by Gold, and released in March of that year. Nearly a year after it was recorded in New York, it defined the band's signature sound, a mixture of American-style boogie rock and complex and symphonic arrangements with time-changing signatures. The iconic Steinhardt violin was a distinctive and iconic element of the group's sound, being defined by more heartland rock than the jazz and classical influences which most progressive rock violinists like Eddie Jobson and those that were, in those bands in the 70s that they had followed. The band had slowly to develop a cult following due to the promotion of the label and extensive touring for their debut album and the two following albums, Songs from America, released in February of 1975, and Masque, which was released in October of that year. So, again, a common thing for prog bands to release 2 albums in 1 year. Songs from America was co-produced, again, by Gold, with their former White Clover band member Jeff Glicksman, who would go on to produce all their albums from Mask to Two for the Show, released in October of 1978 as a live album, on his own, and returning for the helm in 1995's Freaks of Nature. Both Mask and the next release, Let's Never Chill, was recorded at the studio in the middle of a Louisiana bayou named Studio in the country. Kansas released their fourth album, Let's Never Chill, in October of 1976, which produced the hit single Carry On My Wayward Son. So that song would become pretty iconic with lots of mainstream media today, as we know and love. Became pretty much an unofficial anthem of the sci-fi horror show Supernatural. So there you go, there's a bit of legacy for you there with some of the earlier stuff. The follow-up album, which is one of my favourite albums from them, Point of No Return, was released, also recorded in the same studio as Let's Never Chill, and also featured some mixing done and recording done at the Woodland Sound in Nashville, and was released in October of 1977. Where is my mouse? There it is. And it featured the title track and Dust in the Wind as both hit singles. Leftover Chill was a breakthrough for the band and hitting the Billboard Pop charts at number 5. Point of No Return peaked even higher, which birthed at number 4. Both albums sold 4 million copies in the US. Carry On My Wayward Son and Dust in the Wind were certified gold singles, selling over 1 million units each. Dust in the Wind was certified gold as digital download by the RIAA in 2005, almost 30 years after selling 1 million copies as a single. Leftover Chill would be eventually certified 5 times platinum by the RIAA in 2001. Their follow studio album to Point of No Return was Monolith, which was self-produced. The album generated a top 40 single entitled The People of the Southwind, whose title was referred to of the Kazakh called Native American people, after whom the state and band was named. The album failed to garner the sales and the radio airplay of its two predecessors. Nevertheless, the album went to platinum. Livergreen's Platinum Awards is on display at the Kansas Museum of History. The band toured the US for Monolith during the fall and summer of '79, and they would go to tour Japan for the first time in January of 1980. They seemed unstoppable, a band full of energy with each album, up to this point, firing on all cylinders. So what was next for Kansas? Where were they going to go from here? Kansas band members began to drift apart in the early 1980s. During the tour that supported Monolith, Livergreen became a born-again Christian, and this was reflected in his lyrics on the next 3 albums, beginning with Audio Visions, September of 1980, with Hold On, a top 40 single from that album, which displayed his newfound faith. Hope soon became converted to Christianity as well. This would become the final album with the original lineup until they briefly reunited between the years of 1999 and 2000. This would mark the last Kansas studio album to be certified gold by the RIAA. Due to the creative differences over the lyrical direction of the next album, Steve Walsh left in October of '81 to form a new band called Streets. In December, Walsh was replaced by vocalist, keyboardist, and guitarist John Elephant, who, unknown to Livergreen and Hope at the time, was a Christian. He was chosen from over 200 applicants, including Sammy Hagar, Doug Pinnick, Tim Needley, who played the title character in the movie Jesus Christ Superstar, Warren Ham, ex-Blood Rock, who would join the band on the road in '82, adding sax, flute, and harmonica, backup vocals and extra keyboards, and Michael Gleason, who would supply keyboards and backup vocals in the group's '83 tour for Drastic Measures. The first album, with John Elephant at the helms, was called Vinyl Confessions. It was released in June of 1982. The record renewed interest in the group and generated the band's first top 20 hit in over several years, Play the Game Tonight, which hit number 4 on the Billboard's newly deployed mainstream rock chart. The album's mostly Christianity-based lyrics attracted a new audience and generated radio airplay on the then fledgling contemporary Christian rock format. Christian music formats. The album featured backing vocals from Queen's drummer Roger Taylor, who was recording in the studio next door. So presumably at the time it would have been for the album, I think, The Game? For that one? So, though the album was popular and was regaining interest, it wasn't enough, and it fell short of the gold status. As mentioned before with the touring, Drastic Measures was released next in July of '83. For various reasons, Liv Green only contributed to 3 songs in the album, and the rest were penned by Elephant and his brother Dino, with violinist Steinhardt leading the group before the recording sessions as a result of a more mainstream sound appeal with the Christian rock community. He was just not having it, so he left. And because of this, they sounded like Foreigner. Though the album charted lower than any other Kansas album since Masquerade, peaking at number 41, its single Fight Fire with Fire fared better. It didn't crack the top 40 Billboard Hot 100, but it reached number 3 on the Billboard Rock charts, which was the highest position that Kansas had released onto any chart at this point. Though this particular chart did not exist prior to 1981. For their 1983 tour, Drastic Measures, Kansas were joined on stage by the aforementioned John Gleason and Terry Brock, who covered for the absences of Steinhardt's harmony vocals. It was during this time, as Elephant as lead vocalist, that Liv Green became comfortably with the representing his Christian worldview. And after a final New Year's Eve concert in December of 1983, Liv Green and Hope left to form AD with Warren Ham and Michael Gleason. They were joined by drummer Dennis Holt. Elephant, Earnhardt and Williams sought to continue as Kansas and recorded one more song called Perfect Lover, which appeared on the retrospective album The Best of Kansas, released in August of 1984, which has sold over 4 million units in the US alone. This would be removed in favor of other songs on the remastered release of the compilation when it became on CD. The group disbanded after this release and thus made it the final Kansas recording with Elephant. Since leaving the band, Elephant has become a popular contemporary Christian music act and has not performed with the band since, even though he was approached in the later years to come back again. So, with that out of the picture, where was the band going to go? They had broke up, they had no intentions of coming back, so what was to become of the band next? So, in March 1985, the band came back together with Earnhardt, Williams and Walsh, who had briefly played keyboards on the road for Cheap Trick in the spring of 1985 after the breakup of Streets, but without Liv Green, Hope or Steinhardt. The new lineup included Streets bassist Billy Greer and the new guitarist Steve Morse, formerly of the Dixie Dreads. The first performances of the new lineup with Morse and Greer took place during a third USO 1st Airborne Rock and Roll Division tour that toured the military bases in the US, Japan, Okinawa, the Philippines, Singapore, and Iceland, and most of Europe during the late summer throughout early October of 1986. Then they reformed to release Power in November of 1986, with the first single, All I Wanted, to become the last ever Kansas single to hit the top 40 Billboard, peaking at number 19. It also released considerable airplay on MTV. 2 more singles, the title track and Can't Cry Anymore, were less successful, Power hitting the lower end of the Hot 100 and getting substantial play on the charting on the rock charts, but Can't Anymore received little airplay despite having a clever music video. In April of 1991, violinist David Ragsdale, who had submitted his tape playing to Earnhardt several years earlier, was invited to join the group, and the return of violin allowed for Kansas to perform early materials in closer to the original arrangements. Liv Green left during the summer 1991 tour, and to be temporarily replaced again by Steve Morse. After the tour, Morse left the band for good and to return to his own projects and eventually become a member of Deep Purple, as Ragsdale took over the extra guitar parts, leaving Williams as the primary guitar player. This is resulting in a lineup of Ehart, Griel, Ragsdale, Robert, and Roche, and Williams lasted from 1991 to 1997. This period saw one live album and accompanying video, Live at the Whiskey, in July 1992, and one studio album, Freaks of Nature, May of 1995. During the fall of 93, drummer Van Remain, formerly of Blood, Sweat and Tears and Steve Morse's band, came in to substitute for Ehart, who was taking care of the group's business and putting together the Kansas box set, which was released in the summer of 1994. Brian Holmes from the producers likewise filled in for Hart during the spring and summer of December until that when Phil returned for a tour of Germany. It was then in July of 28th of 1995 that Kansas would be inducted into the Rock Walk of Fame in Hollywood. And then in December, in early 1997, so I'm thinking around maybe January, February, Robert and Ragsdale left and return of Steinhardt. I always have trouble mispronouncing Robbie's last name. Anyway, he would return to the band in place. In May of 1998, they would release an album called Kansas Release Always Never the Same, which featured the conductor Larry Bardard with the Symphony Orchestra of London, which they mixed in the older Kansas material arranged by Bard, and several new songs and a cover of Eleanor Rigby. Somewhere to Elsewhere was a new studio album released in July of 2000, which featured all the original members of Kansas plus Greer, with all the songs written by Kerry Livgren. In that same summer, Kansas were the opening acts for Yes during their Masterworks tour. I also should note that in 1996 they were opening acts for the Alan Parsons Project as well. During the late 1990s and early 2000s, Livgren would, on occasion, would attend Kansas shows and come on stage and play one or two songs with the band. At a March 2002 gig at the Lake Tahoe, he played the whole show, subbing in for Rich Williams, who was under the weather. And another live album and DVD would be released from Kansas entitled Device, Voice and Drum, or DVD, which was recorded at the band's present home of Atlanta on June 15th, 2002, and was released in that October. So there you go. The band was getting back together, and everything was looking good. So, what were things looking like in the 2000s and beyond to this day? Kansas continued to tour every year. The 2006 tour was delayed for a few weeks due to Steinhardt's second departure in March and Ragsdale's subsequent return to the lineup. In Kansas of 2008, the Kansas website announced that 4 of the 5 members had formed a side project called Native Window and that they released their self-titled debut album in June of 2009. Kansas recorded, also in that same year, a concert in Topeka featuring another orchestra lineup, with Larry again conducting, with Morse and Livgren appearing as special guests on several songs. The performances was released on CD, DVD, and Blu-ray, known as There's No Place Like Home, and in that October, and the DVD hit number 5 on the music video charts on the Billboards the week after its release. In 2013, Kansas announced a 40th anniversary celebration was in the works. However, Robbie suffered a heart attack days before the concert and was unable to participate. Nevertheless, the show went on. Billed as the 40th anniversary fan appreciation concert performed in Pittsburgh on August 17th, 2013, at the same venue, the Bendham Center, formerly the Stanley Theatre, which had propelled them to national recognition. It featured guest appearances again from Livgren and Hope, and the first set featured again the symphonic accompaniment by the Three Rivers Orchestra, and again, composed and orchestrated by Larry Bard. Intermissions featured Phil Earnhardt overseeing random prize drawings and autographed band merchandise, videotapes, 40th anniversary well wishes from other band members, an exclusive first look at the trailer for now known documentary on the band Miracles Out of Nowhere. In 2014, a statement on the official Facebook page announced the impending retirement of Steve Walsh. So it was at this time that he was considering leaving. So, yeah. In that same year, former member John Elefant issued a statement, said he had been contacted by the band on August the 2nd to discuss rejoining. However, 2 days later, after turning to prayer, he said it would be not meant to be, and at this point he had also cited Steve Walsh as one of the reasons why he wants to become a singer. Well, there you go. Kansas that influential that it influenced their own members who replaced original members. Go figure. On the 14th of August, it was stated that Chicago native Ronnie Platt, who had previously sung with Shooting Star, had been selected as the new lead vocalist and keyboard player. On the 24th of August, it was announced that their long-time lighting specialist David Manion would be handling the main keyboard parts on stage alongside Platt, giving the group a full-time keyboardist for the first time since Glenn Roberts' departure in 1997. He had also handled keyboard responsibilities for Kansas bassist and vocalist Billy Greer's band Seventh Key. On 2015, they had signed with Internet Music, a German label which is pretty well known to us prog rock fans and related genres, with the release of their 15th studio album upcoming. This release marked the longest period to date since studio albums, which somewhere elsewhere had been released over 15 years ago prior in 2000. They would mark in 2016 that the announcement for the Prelude in place for a September release. The album's co-producer and co-writer Zach Zeriffi was subsequently named as a full member of the band, giving Kansas a second-time full guitarist since the first time since Steve Morse's departure in 1991. It was announced in 2020 that there would be an upcoming release of a new studio album, The Absence of Presence. But due to manufacturing delays, it had to be delayed and be released on the July 17th, 2020. It was promoted with 3 videos for the songs Throwing Mountains, Memories Down the Lane, and Jets Overhead. Recording for the album took place simultaneously between the 2019 touring schedule. The sad news of Robbie passing away from pancreatitis occurred in July of 2021, who would die at the age of 71. It was at this time, I think, I was introduced to the band by my good friend Joshua Batten through his cover of Miracles Out of Nowhere for Robbie's departure from this world. And most recently, they'd released an album in December of last year called Another Fork in the Road, which released various tracks from all 16 Kansas City albums. However, tracks from The Power and In the Spirit of Things are omitted on disc 2 of the North American version. It features a new 2022 recording of Can I Tell You, a track originally from Kansas's self-penned, self-titled debut album. Part 5. Influences. So, their musical style influences a mixture of hard rock, so, that's your Kiss, that's your Styx, all those bands of that time, southern rock, and prog rock. They were also influenced by music-wise by Yes, Genesis, or inspiration to them, especially through the lyrics of Steve Walsh. Liv Green has cited the 1960s band Touch as a fundamental to his development. Him evolving spiritually was reflecting in the band's songs, with early work showing interest in the mysticism of Eastern religions. Works in the late 1970s, they were influenced by the spiritual philosophy of the Renantra book. followed it in the 1980s. They were influenced by embracing born-again Christianity and then reformed and produced a harder pop metal album by the late 1980s, getting back to the classic Kansas sort of 80s, late 80s sound. So, all that out of the way, all the history, all that stuff, one of my favourite moments of Kansas as a whole, as a fan. I've got 3 moments that I could share with you. The first one is The Spider. This is a classic instrumental from the Point era of Kansas, which is pinned to Steve Walsh. It shows the intricate nature of Kansas's prog era, and that it has these hints and nods to classic Emerson, Lake and Palmer, yes, and some could say the classic Gentle Giants in the playing of Liv Green and Walsh alongside a tight performance of the rest of the band. You really got to hear the song live or the studio performance of it to really understand the fundamentals of this tight classic prog instrumental. Fight Fire with Fire and Going Through the Motions. 2 songs from the reborn era of Kansas from the album Drastic Measures shows that John Elephant at full force on vocals and keyboards to explore the band in more of a foreigner sounding direction, especially with Fight Fire with Fire, which showcased the band adapting to these new surroundings and playing off the strengths of Elephant in this era, and delivers the band in a fine form to make this classic pop rock material. And of course, not to forget Vinyl Confessions, which houses the iconic Play the Game Tonight, and my favourite deep cut from this period, Windows. There was just something about this John's short stay to the band that I really enjoyed a lot, because I am a sucker for 80s pop rock, so explains why I like Abacab and all those bands, the albums a lot. And of course, as aforementioned before, Miracles Out of Nowhere from the Left Overture album from 1976. This classic deep cut was played by my friend and local musician Joshua Batten when Robbie Steinhardt had passed away as a tribute to his contributions to Kansas, and was my beginning to this incredible band. Acoustically, it sounded beautiful by his rendition of the song, which highlights the emotion and beauty of the song's lyrics and composition of this early favourite from many fans from the Left Overture album. And so to conclude, Kansas, I feel, are a band for the generations. With their music, like I mentioned earlier, being in modern media, and showing how memorable their classic years were to the audience of the 1970s, their appeal of the Elephant era to the Christian community, and those who just like classic rock at its finest, shows this band represents what makes this era of music so special to listeners, and a prime example of American music. This has been the Vinyl Hub. We'll see you on the flip side. Cheers.